You're listening to a new episode of The Brave Technologist. We're back this week with another episode we recorded at the AI Summit in New York City. This one features Chastity Murphy, a former senior advisor at the U.S.Treasury Department who helps shape federal policy on central bank digital currency and digital payments. She was the first congressional staffer to draft stablecoin legislation under Representative Rashida Tlaib, and Chastity is now a visiting research fellow at the University of Manchester's Law and Technology Initiative and one of the leading architects of privacy-preserving digital public money. In this episode, we discussed how early stablecoin legislation shaped our understanding of digital money, privacy, and consumer protection, the gap between how technologists and policymakers think about digital money, real-world risks of surveillance and data visibility in financial transactions, along with practical approaches for creating offline, anonymous, and interoperable digital payment systems that don't sacrifice usability. And now for this week's episode of The Brave Technologist. Chastity, welcome to The Brave Technologist. How are you?
Good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this one. I know you were working on one of the congressional teams that was first working on the Stable Act, I think.
Yes.
How did working on legislation help shape your understanding of what digital money should protect and what it shouldn't?
So during the time that we worked on Stable Act, we were actually in the middle of COVID. It was actually the last bill that we introduced, and I was working for Representative Tlaib out of Michigan at the time. And one of the things we noticed is that there was a large transition from the use of cash to the use of digital payments.
Yeah.
And as we started to understand and move to more on the digital front, it became an issue overall because we realized there were a lot of stablecoin issuers presenting their products as deposits. Thinking that there's some sort of insurance, people thinking that they have some protected liabilities. And what ultimately and eventually happened is we said, well, we need to get in front of this. We need to try to figure out how to regulate stablecoins and do this within the prudential regulatory framework. Which is something that we hadn't done before. We've seen with money market mutual funds, we've seen with repo. There's always this other tier of regulation that's created, and usually when there is a financial crisis, those particular products can destabilize. So we wanted to bring this in the prudential regulatory tier and think about it in that way. Well, because it was so ahead of the curve in terms of what people's focuses were at the time, people didn't actually start to really consider stablecoin legislation until about a year later, which is around the time I joined Treasury, and that's when we had the PWG report. And the PWG report really referenced a lot of what we said in the Stable Act with some pieces in there like narrow banking. And that was a thing that we started to think about more intensely. But it's really, the question that we really had to ask ourselves was is this a fight over digital money? Is it over who can contribute to the architecture of economic life? And we had to think about that in a way of how do we create some framework for people to navigate within the regulatory tier, and how do we build architecture that could potentially allow people to transact if they are cash dependent? And that's just sort of how the thinking went around stablecoin legislation.
And I can imagine it's kind of a challenge even within especially at the time, right? Cryptocurrencies was kind of like a new early thing then, and stablecoins were still kind of, I can imagine it's probably tough to navigate. What surprised you most about the gap between how policymakers think and about digital money and how technologists think about it? So
I think technologists think about it in terms of capabilities. I think policymakers think about it in terms of liabilities. Right. A technologist is thinking, how far can we go? And a policymaker is saying, did we go too far? Okay. Right? Yeah, that's fair. And I think the underlying assumptions from both ends is technologists are assuming that policymakers understand the underlying technology. Right. And policymakers are assuming that technologists understand the social contract behind money. Right. So I think that there's really a gap in both language and in values. One side is trying to optimize that efficiency, and the other is trying to protect stability. And the truth of the matter is the public just got caught in the middle. Right. Yeah, because there's this whole adoption curve too, right? One thing is just seems totally foreign one day, and then the next you blink and it's okay, now millions of people are using this stuff, and it's they can get a thing out to market fast enough to where, okay, if PayPal's doing it now, or if another vendor like that's already doing it, then you've already got adoption at a certain scale. I think the biggest thing that it's probably important is to center a lot of this in rights versus risk. And I think when we think about it from that standpoint, we can potentially translate and rebuild how the public thinks about the product, but also how people who are building the architecture can think about it as well.
Right.
And you're right. I think in the States, there's a lot of gaps in terms of privacy and data, and that also has to get really fine-tuned and thought about on the back end for sure.
Do you think the public actually understands like how much of their financial life is already visible by third parties?
Not at all.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
I agree.
People know things, right? They know that, banks can see certain transactions, but they don't understand the scale and the routine of the type of financial, visibility. It's every swipe, every bill pay, every transfer. That metadata can be analyzed and sold without any explicit consent.
Yeah.
And I think the public thinks surveillance is about big purchases.
Right.
They think it's about, fraud and suspicious activity, but it's the smallest like mundane patterns. It's where do you buy groceries?
Right.
Something as simple as what pharmacy do you use, and then they can take that data and sort of determine some underlying characteristics about you as a person. I think the thing that I would also add here is, which I think is pretty large, I don't think people understand how much the public actually interacts, and how much Treasury or how much FinCEN, how much these other actors actually share our data, financial data. You got to think, a lot of banks they over-report.
Right.
To try to stay within compliance.
Right.
And because they're over-reporting, there's a mass amount of data that's being shared, and that data is going into a aggregating sort of site. I think everyone's now heard of them, Palantir.
Right.
And so now we see that law enforcement can access Palantir. DHS can access Palantir. What do they do with that data? And so people don't know that. They're not necessarily aware that is happening.
Right.
And that's a thing I want to raise awareness. There's one thing to say, yes, the private sector has a mass amount of access to our data. And because it's unregulated, it's where it goes, how it's treated is one thing. There's another thing to say that where you have to use banks and other types of ways to transact in the digital economy or the economy more broadly, it's also being surveilled by the public.
Right.
And that's scary given that we're in this sort of authoritarian system. I mean,
No. Hey, I'm with you. We build privacy products. So I get that. I mean, this is where I kind of worry about it too, where you have this is what the governments are collecting and sharing and kind of collating, right? And then also there's so much like third-party data about people out there and how people are using it to balance out credit score ratings and things like that too. Things that people aren't even considering. It's just, it's really interesting. But I think your point about how you're using the money is a really valid one too, because I don't think people are really aware of the degree to which that information's out there. What is a cryptographic capability you're most excited about right now that can meaningfully shift how people experience financial privacy and activity?
I think I'm probably most excited about selective disclosure.
Okay.
I would also say zero knowledge proofs. Imagine proving I'm over 18 without revealing your identity.
Right.
Or if you're proving I'm not on the sanctions list. I think one of the things we worked on, one of the last things I worked on at Treasury or one of the reports is a lot of people are subject to multiple identifiers, especially people who exist in the Muslim community. And they could be easily locked out of a bank account because they are associated with potentially maybe a terrorist or someone on the sanctions list, and so their account is frozen.
Yeah.
So I think making sure that we don't expose someone's financial history and using those attributes are helpful, and those aren't just like technological tricks. They open the door for a world where compliance and privacy aren't in competition with each other. And for the first time, we can design a system where people can give just enough information to meet the rule, but not so much that they are losing some sort of civil liberty or right. Or lose their agency more broadly.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point too, especially with the potential for false positives and all sorts of things, and with cultures and everything. If we failed to kind of build a rights-preserving digital money, what does the world look like in 10 years?
It looks like frictionless authoritarianism.
All right.
And not dramatic, not dystopian, just quiet, seamless, control. A world where transaction is traceable. Every purchase is behavioral data. I would say every, financial decisions comes from a risk score. And, I talked a little bit about it before, but let me try to center it in real life.
Yeah.
Right now, like at this present moment, if I were living in Texas, I just moved back to DC from Texas, right?
Okay.
And if I decided I would like to get access to reproductive health medicine or services, I can't necessarily do that if I want to use my card or debit card or something. So like they can use that data to prosecute us.
Right.
And then I gave an example to a friend the other day who's on Zoran's team, transitional team, and this question of what does this mean for immigrants?
Yeah.
And who want to just transact and not.
Right.
So there are real life implications because ICE can get that information. We've seen examples of that where Western Union sold some data to DHS and it caused a whole case. So we don't want a system where everything is surveilled. We do not want to live in a world where everything is surveilled. We need to create a cash-like digital system that doesn't necessarily need to exist on software but hardware. People don't notice the shift all at once. They'll just wake up one day and realize that they stopped taking certain actions.
Yeah, well, I mean, and there's a lot of truth to that because we saw when the Supreme Court kind of overturned the Roe v. Wade stuff, like a whole new wave of privacy interest because you had people that were using like third parties to basically like track like people going around Planned Parenthoods and things like that. And it's one of those things where if it's not in front of your face or like impacting you, you're not necessarily thinking about it, right? I feel like I could go talk to a real, hardcore libertarian person, or I could talk to somebody on the left. And there's actually a lot more alignment around that fundamental want of not having a surveillance state, where I feel like it gets lost a lot, like in the political process, where like people are so like kind of, fisticuffing over whatever and tribally kind of like my party versus yours. And realistic, everybody's like kind of a human wants to have like the basic.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it within the administration. That we were in constant people who were really trying to bring to the forefront conversations from ACLU, other privacy and data academics. We saw at the forefront us saying, hey, privacy and anonymity has to matter. It's the second largest reasons why people are unbanked. But more importantly, everyone doesn't want to be surveilled. That's why we have cash, right?
Exactly.
But at the same time, we're running up against the same people who are in the Treasury building, which is Spencer, who wants mass surveillance. They refuse for us to use the word anonymity. They said privacy. I said no, anonymity.
Wow.
And we lost that debate.
Wow.
Because the Democrats decided to sort of pass over that conversation around privacy and the need for privacy and anonymity. Guess what took over? The Republicans did. And they now use it as a tool to say, you don't want CDBC, you don't want public infrastructure, and you don't want the government surveilling your transactions, and that's what they're doing. And meanwhile, we see in this administration, Musk has access to, Musk did have Doge had access to Treasury payments.
Where
did that data go? Where is all that data being treated? So that's a real loss with the party, is that we did not take the opportunity to capture and really say anonymity is important. I mean, when you think about it, like when I go to other countries, even when I'm, working at Manchester, they're very anti-surveillance. So I'm actually trying to understand why we're so behind the pendulum. People want to opt into being surveilled. People want to opt into certain things. You shouldn't have to like choose between your privacy and anonymity and using something that's more efficient.
Right. No, exactly. There shouldn't be a trade-off that requires that. And I think it's really interesting to hear you talk about it this way, because I like, from the outside, I mean, especially because we were in the sector, right? So it was very much like things just got cold in DC. But like hearing that there was this like opposition, and like, how does it make you feel about this next wave of politicians on the Democrat? Do you think that the Democrats are going to get more on page with that? Or do you think that they're seeing the lesson that you're talking about here, where if we don't do this, the other side's going to use it?
I don't think they're actually understanding and heeding into the lesson that was there, to be completely honest. But I do think that because there was a wave of concern about Doge accessing Treasury's information, I think now people are thinking, what guardrails do we need to put in place? But that takes a lot of narrative changing. I think that takes a lot of municipal and local government effort to sort of show that this is an important thing to our municipality and allow that to soft launch or pilot the government thinking about it on a more federal and national scale. So I think that's important. My biggest fear with the Democratic Party is that we are going to go back to the status quo, that we're not going to learn our lesson, that we are still going to try to be in the, center-right level of politics and actually not necessarily think about true social contracts and social contracts that impact people, we always want to play in the middle. And we really need to be trying to capture a lot of the left, a lot of the generation who care a lot about this issue, and we keep missing the pendulum there.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's super interesting. Your research is exploring some of the anonymous, like public interest payments. What's a use case that makes you realize this is really why it matters? Is some of that what we were talking about?
Yeah. So, we're working on a public interest payment system that's offline, anonymous, interoperable, and closed loop.
Okay.
And right now, Manchester is focused on it, I would say, mostly in terms of the UK. But because right now in the United States, we can't necessarily focus on it from the federal government standpoint, we have to focus on it on a municipal level and use that as narrative changing if we get out of the authoritarian system. And so the use cases that we've been thinking of, and I brought it up before, is how can someone get access to reproductive health and medication if, they live in a hostile state like Texas, but want to get access to maybe a clinic that is in California or in DC. Right. And so how do we completely think through all the threat vectors? How do we make it completely offline? And then one of the things we realize is a lot of people who want to get access to these types of medications, they're in low-income class. So how do we do this with a credit card and still anonymize it? And so we've thought through prepaid contactless payment cards, maybe based out of Planned Parenthood, where they can get access to these particular cards. But you can make it even more interoperable. In Texas, there's a grocery store called H-E-B. Okay. It's in every local neighborhood. I call it a cult. But anyways, it's interesting because they have these cards right now, and it's prepaid, and they use it for reloading for toll. Accessing toll or paying it that way. I think if we could take that card, make it a contactless payment, and people are able to use it in other areas. Hong Kong has a card like this as well. They use it in other areas. I think it's a really useful offline anonymous use case that could be potentially helpful, and they can use it for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of flood activity in Houston and other parts of Texas. I think that's an opportunity to get flood mobility funds to communities. And then there's other use cases, right, where people exist on college campuses. When they get their Pell Grants, that's operated by a third party. And sometimes that third party takes fees on the back end. And so I think there's a question of how do we do this where the students can get their money directly? And then there's this larger unbanked question, right, where we've talked about a few times, where some people just don't want bank accounts. I just did a roundtable, and we were going back and forth. Like, you need a bank account in order to do this. I'm like, actually, you don't. We've seen it happen. We've seen M-Pesa. We've seen Alipay. We've seen all these different ways that people have transacted Avant where they did not have a bank account. And so I think how do we do this? Say, hey, if you don't have to have a bank account. You don't need an intermediary. You can just transact. I saw someone at a conference have a fingernail with payments. Take a payment. So you don't need a bank account. You don't need an intermediary. You can do this on hardware devices, and that is the main point that we are trying to drive. That's and then awesome. Hopefully you can on-ramp it into some sort of software device like Cash App, like Venmo, like some sort of way to do this without necessarily having to sacrifice your anonymity. So we're thinking through those use cases. The biggest one right now for me is trying to think through if we can do it through HEB or if we can do it through a college campus. And another one that I didn't mention is probably the most popular one, which is what Hong Kong is using, is transit. Or you go to a transit station, you can reload that hardware, that card, right, at the transit system, but you can only use it at the transit system. What if you just use it everywhere? And there's no ledger, there's no background, that's just you put the money on there, and then it's like your prepaid. It's like a prepaid card. So that's how we're thinking about it, and we think that it can solve a lot of issues, even down to the digital divide. So we're excited about it.
And it resonates so much with just the ethos around why a lot of us got into the crypto stuff in the first place. We don't need to it all kind of emerged out of the financial crisis, right? In 2008, where it was we watched a whole generation of retirees lose half their retirement, people lose their houses, and all out of this crisis that everybody just using banks because they have to, that we can have a better alternative, right?
Yeah,
I think it's cool. I didn't expect to hear what I'm hearing right now. I think it's really awesome. I'm glad that you all are working on that. So you're working on this at Manchester. Is there something, are you prototyping anything now? Is there anything in progress?
We're not prototyping anything just yet. I think right now we're assessing the use cases. We're thinking about potential threat vectors. We're seeing if the Bank of England might be considering taking this up and considering our design. And then right now there is potential for pilots in some of those jurisdictions that I was talking to you about in the States.
Oh, cool.
And so we're just trying to get to a place where we have at least some level of consensus for some of the different use cases and then trying to launch that. But right now it's just more in the research, case, proving these cases phase. But I think a lot of funders would be interested, and there has been some that sort of poked at, okay, how can we support this?
Yeah.
So yeah, we're excited.
That's awesome. I think it's super cool. What different choices do you think people would make if they had access to this tech money?
Offline.
Yeah.
I mean, I think people, there's like benefits on either side, right? The benefits of having a bank account, right? You have deposit insurance, you know, like something were to happen, if you lose your money, right? You're covered. And then there are benefits of cash, right? Or benefits of cash-like products. But there are downsides to both, right? Bank account, this is like...
Someone could shred it off.
Right. And then like you're getting surveilled regardless, right?
Yeah.
With cash, you're not getting surveilled, but the downside of it is like if you lose that card, just like if you lose your cash.
Yep. It's gone.
It's gone. So I think people would use it, but I think that the real case for people using this, outside of the fact that they want privacy and anonymity, outside of the fact that they want to transact in this economy, especially in this particular government, I think the real case for this is like, how do we on-ramp people into other types of products? It could be software, it could be a bank account. Giving people the option. People shouldn't have to choose either or.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
You got to meet people where they are.
Right,
like,
exactly.
That's my biggest frustration is like being in this space for 10 years is none of my neighbors know a product that uses the technology that would work. But like, how many of your neighbors know a crypto app? No one, right?
No
like
one,
you got to meet them where they are, right? Like, and the rails are there. Like you just have to. And I'm pretty confident we can. How do you feel? You feel optimistic about this? Like where this is going or where it can go? I mean, do you think it's doable?
I do think it's doable. I think that it's how we talk about it, though.
Yeah.
I think it's what I talked about with the Democratic, like the friction, which is within the party, within the administration. But I think there is a silver lining, right? If Republicans are saying they care about privacy and anonymity, and there are a section of Democrats that also are saying we care about privacy and anonymity, I think we need to like hook onto that. I say that because there was a bill that was introduced, and I cannot remember the representative's name to save my life, but he introduced a bill. He was like, it was an anti-CDBC bill. But what he did, what he excluded was e-cash. And hardware electronic cash. And so I think that there is a silver lining where people would be on the same page about the use of this particular product. I don't think it would be too hard, but I think we have to get people to understand how it works. We have to pilot it. We have to research. We have to talk about it more. We have to do more of these.
Right, exactly.
Do more podcasts, do more conversations, and get people really bought into the idea. And it's a lot of this is about narrative changing.
Awesome. That's great. I just have a couple of rapid fire questions.
Sure.
If you don't mind. One book that shaped how you think about technology and power?
I would say The Wealth Divide was a really good one for me.
Awesome. What's the best lesson you learned from working inside the government?
Best lesson. You have to understand bureaucracy and red tape in order to push policy forward. But I think the biggest lesson I've learned is that can make you jaded and make you think about things in a way where it's just like you don't really want to do it. And so you have to really go in when there's interest that you want to defend, there's people who you want to put at the forefront. You have to really allow yourself to be motivated by that. You have to stay connected to the community. You cannot get into a bubble where everybody is like-minded and thinks like you. It will not help progress anything forward.
Oh, that's awesome. And what city do you think is quietly becoming like a digital money innovation hub?
Somewhere between California, like San Francisco, maybe. I don't know if we have a good city for this. Maybe New York City with their MTA, way that they use their cards on the transit system.
Thank you so much, Chastity. I really appreciate you making the time. Where can people follow your work or anything that you might want our followers to know about?
University of Manchester's website is really good. Awesome. I'm also doing a fellowship at Roosevelt Institute about a lot of this work. So we'll be publishing papers there on the University of Manchester in Lati Lab. And then I think if they want to follow me, I mean, I don't do much of Instagram, but you can always have me on LinkedIn, Chastity Murphy, and I'm doing my best there to try to promote as much information and things that we're doing at both institutes as possible.
Thank you. I really appreciate you making the time. This is a great conversation, and we'll have to check back in.
Sounds good.
All right,
thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Brave Technologist podcast. To never miss an episode, make sure you hit follow in your podcast app. If you haven't already made the switch to the Brave browser, you can download it for free today at brave.com and start using Brave Search, which enables you to search the web privately. Brave also shields you from the ads, trackers, and other creepy stuff following you across the web.